What's up guys, Asian here again, and this is not pretty different from other posts that I've done in the fact that it doesn't really involve necessarily theory crafting or any sort of builds. Rather, this was a post that was made earlier today, and it concerns a new sort of feature that's going to be implemented into the Elsewhere when it is released, as well as on the Elsewhere PTS for us to test out. This particular feature has kind of been very controversial ever since it was posted about 12-14 hours ago now. So I figured that I would kind of show you guys what it is, or I should rather say I should explain what it is and kind of what this means for the average player, the casual player, and then the endgame player as well. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here. So this was a post by Zos Bobby Wire. This basically is talking about logs in ESO. And we're not talking about logs like the wood logs, we're talking about actual written logs, combat logs basically. So they're basically adding the capacity for PC players to export group-based encounter logs onto a local file, and that's going to be located on your hard disk drive. So it's basically going to write this sort of encounter log and put it on your hard drive if you decide to enable logging. These logs can then be uploaded to an external site, in this case ESOlogs.com. This is created by somebody who plays the game, Kira, who is also on the Toxic Rating Environment Discord. So if you guys have any questions about how her website works, feel free to maybe ping her on the TRE Discord. I will have a link to the Discord link below in the description if you guys want to join that if you haven't already, so that way you guys can get actual information on how this external site works, because there does seem to be a lot of misinformation going around about how this site actually interacts with those logs. And so these combat logs are basically combat events. So basically can think of it as a very, very detailed combat metrics report. So in order to start the logging, you need to type into the chat window /encounter log. And then when you want to disable it, you just type that same command again, /encounter log, a second time. And then when you do that, once you type it in the beginning, it'll start writing to your hard drive. It'll start writing down whatever is happening in the group. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the group either. They did mention on the live stream that it can also work in solo content as well, and it'll basically record pretty much everything there is that you want to know about your basically combat encounter. So on the live stream, they did happen to show what an example sort of combat log would look like on the website, and the sort of information you'd be able to get from it. So you're able to get pretty much everything that Commetrics already collects. So that would be things like damage done, where your damage is coming from, any healing done, healing received, things like that. There's also a couple of other things that you might want that the log also collects. Deaths, what you died from, so specific attacks where your damage is coming in from. It takes into consideration resurrections as well, and so it takes pretty much all these different things, buffs, debuffs, uptimes, the amount of damage you're doing, your DPS, and basically puts it in a basically a GUI, a graph, just basically sort of a user interface that you can actually sort of make sense of what the log actually writes out, because the log itself just writes out basically just straight up text lines. So ESOlogs.com basically takes that basically chunk of text, that text file, says as a text file, and converts it into something that you can actually visualize instead. And so this is a very, very powerful tool for raid groups that really want to see where they are improving. Now, if you guys remembered, I think this was about 3 or 4 years ago, there was actually an add-on command on the API that basically allowed you to see the group combat data. I think it was just group DPS at the time. And then at some point, decided to basically remove that functionality because there was this sort of fear that people would end up using this to judge other people, to be toxic, and things like that. So this encounter logging pretty much does the exact same thing, just at a much more fine-grained, detailed level. And in order to make sense of the log, you will have to use something like ESOlogs.com, or basically know what each individual line is saying in the log in order to really make sense of the data here. And so they're starting this up on the PTS, and then it's obviously going to go live and elsewhere. They're going to be looking for feedback from basically anybody on the PTS who's using this feature here. So now, one of the big things that a lot of people have had concerns about is privacy. For some reason, people seem to think that this is impacted by the GDPR. It's a EU law that basically governs the use of and identifiable personal data. And so a lot of people seem, for whatever reason, seems to think that this particular logging and this website, ESO Logs, is in violation of the GDPR. And the fact of the matter is, it's not. And that's because usernames and the sort of information that is read into the log is not actually personally identifiable. It doesn't classify itself as personally identifiable data. Well, you can say, well, I use my username. My username is identified to me, or something like that. In a sense, it is, because you're the one that is adopting that username, that character name, sure. But if you think about it, your username is not unique to yourself. Sure, it is unique to you in the realm of Elder Scrolls Online, but in the greater sense of the word identifiable, there might be 100, 200, 300 people who might use that specific user ID, Jane76443 or something like that. So just because it's personally identifiable to you on ESO doesn't mean it is necessarily personally identifiable anywhere else. Plus, in order for it to be personally identifiable, that username would need to basically be tied back to some other piece of personal data that can be used to personally identify you. So let's say that my user ID is put onto this website, so it's obviously the Asian God. If you just had that user ID, if you just had my character name, let's say I'm using my Tang, let's say you just had the name Shen Liu, you wouldn't have any idea how to connect it back to me unless there was something else that was connecting that character name to some other personal identifiable data. In other words, so for example, if the log, for whatever reason, also captured your email address, in that instance, yes, this might be impacted by the GDPR, because then you can take my character name Shen Liu, go back to the combat logs, find the email address associated with that character name, and then use with that email address, you would then be able to trace it back to my real person identity. So in terms of violating the GDPR is pretty strong, but it does not impact this. Other MMOs have very similar functionalities. World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy XIV, for example, they do have external websites. ESO also has external websites that collects people's username. So that would be things like ESO leaderboards and ESOrating.com. Both of those collect directly from the Elder Scrolls API the leaderboards for trials. So that has pretty much depending on which website you're using, obviously, it can have your builds, it has your character names, it has your scores. So those sites, both ESO Rating, ESO Leaderboards, and the sites for things like World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy XIV, those have not been shut down yet. Those have not been served any sort of legal documents concerning violations of GDPR. So ESO Logs, by extension, is also probably not going to be impacted by GDPR. Again, the sort of the legal standards you'd have to meet in order to say my character name is personally identifiable data is not met here. The other thing is, well, I don't want people to basically go through this publicly available website with these publicly available logs and basically take a look at what I'm doing in my group. I don't want people to see that, and that is a legitimate concern. And they did talk about this on stream, how to opt out. The creator of the website has also taken lengths to explain how you can opt out of having your name displayed, so that way, if your name is on the website, it can show up as anonymous, or you can even hide the combat log entirely if whoever has uploaded the combat log decides to make it private. So there has been a few concerns there, and I think a lot of it stems back to, well, I don't want somebody to basically use this combat log to basically look me up, basically see how much DPS I'm doing, and basically say, no, you're not allowed to be in my guild, you're not allowed to be in my raid group because you're not pulling the correct amount of DPS. That is a legitimate concern. However, there are already tools in the game right now that basically allow you to do that. Combat metrics is a big one, especially for 4-man content, where you have traditionally 1 tank, 1 healer, and 2 DPS. If your DPS is pulling 70% of the DPS, then it's obvious that the other DPS is pulling at the most 30% additional DPS. And in addition, skilled players, endgame PvE players that pug things just because we don't have, and not everybody's online at the same time, not everybody wants to do pledges and things like that. it's very easy for us to see when somebody is not performing at a capable level in order to complete a dungeon, in which case a lot of us will either try to help that person, figure out what's wrong, see if we can improve the DPS, either slog through it, or we just completely quit. It's very, very rare that I've ever seen or met somebody who's actually like voted to kick somebody in a pug group because of low DPS. Typically speaking, we just say, no, this is not going to work out, and we just remove ourselves and eat the time penalty. So there's already there's this sort of concern that people are going to be using this website to basically quote judge other people. Code actually has written up a very, very nice post. If I can find it, I believe it's on the 8th page. But basically, this entire thread here has basically been a lot of back and forth, and it's pretty much been the same couple of people that have expressed these sort of concerns. But let me see if I can find codes. Here it is. So code 65536, really, really great guy. So he basically sort of made this really, really detailed post about basically all the different concerns. So the first thing is we do not know what the default setting is going to be. We know that there's going to be an option in game to basically opt out of your name being connected to that logging data. So instead your name will be showing up as anonymous. However, we don't know what the default is, whether it is an opt out or an opt in. Most of us are going to be assuming it's going to be an opt in, but who knows, it might be opt-out. This is on ZOS, so this is not on the website creator. This is on ZOS because it is a ZOS functionality that they are putting in here. And then in terms of this quote naming and shaming fear that a lot of people have, there again, he basically goes through and says that it is already possible to do so with current sort of tools. You have group frames, which shows you whether someone's taking damage or not, whether they're dying or things like that. You can screenshot things already. You can basically say, hey, look, this is what I was dealing with last night, and you can post it onto a Discord. You can already screenshot it, and your names are clearly on the group frames. Boss health bar is base game, and if you're running comp metrics, obviously that is an add-on that you can already see. So, if the boss health bar is at 80% and you look down the comp metrics report and it says it's 10 minutes in, you know who the 2 DPS are. So basically a lot of things are already in the base game or are an add-on that a lot of people are already using. So the example he gave here was somebody so he's I believe he's on Night Fighters. So he had a friend pug a dungeon as a tank, and basically he went through Banner Cells 2, and the DPS in the group was very, very low, so there were 7 day drops by the time the boss reached 83% health. This person took a screenshot and shared it on the Discord. This is all basically base game stuff. So the whole idea that this sort of functionality will increase in the amount of naming and shaming, that doesn't really hold water, because there's already tools in game, either in the base game or through add-ons like comment metrics and things like that, that already make naming and shaming possible. There's nothing that logging does that really increases the possibility of doing this. In fact, it'd be even harder to do so, because not only do you have to make sure somebody is actually collecting the logs, who knows, you have to actually actively activate logging in order to get it to log. It does not just automatically log as soon as you're in a group. Somebody actually has to go in and purposely activate logging. Then that person needs to have an account on ESO logs and actively upload that onto the log. Somebody who is interested in naming and shaming you would then have to go into the log, know what your character name is, figure out, see if that log is actually publicly available, and then they'd have to name and shame you. So that's a lot of different hoops you have to jump through just to name and shame one person. And again, there's already things you can do in game that are just as easy as just taking a screenshot. So clearly the whole name and shaming thing, well, that doesn't really hold water here. So the other thing that he really, really points out to is that it is not just looking at DPS. The fact that these combat logs also gave things like, what are you dying to? What are your buff and debuff uptimes? How many people are being resurrected? It also, on the stream, they show that there's even actually, it can map out exactly what you're doing in that specific dungeon or trial. It'll actually show up where you're moving, what you're doing in real time as the log is being read. So this basically gives us a huge functionality to people like me, people who raid, people who lead raid groups. This gives us an additional tool to help diagnose what's going on with our raid. Why are people dying? What are people dying to? Is there anything that I can do as a raid lead to basically change our strategy a little bit, maybe talk with the person who is a really big problem to kind of see what's happening here. So for example, VMAW is a very, very classic example of where this tool is going to be very, very important. And this, because there's so many mechanics that are happening in Maw, we'll be able to see with this tool who is dying to what. Are the people dying to the voids on pad 3? Are they dying to the tethers, not walking the tethers out of group? Because we can actually see in real time if people are moving out of the group to deal with the tethers. Is it the popcorn that's coming from the center? Are people dying in backroom? What's happening in backroom? Are they taking an optimal path on the backroom? Because are they taking too long? There's a lot of information that we can glean from these combat logs that we can't currently do in the base game. And this is going to be really, really great for people who are progressing through content, for the raid leads who really want to help people improve, who want to help their team improve. That's what the point 3 is about. This is a lot more than just saying what is your DPS. There's already tons of add-ons that can do this for us. FDC, bandits, LUI, combat metrics, holders reflexes. That's just 5 add-ons right there that we can already see what DPS is like. So we don't need anything to kind of know what other people's DPSs are like. We already have functionality built in with other add-ons. This just gives us the ability to really fine-tune and really get into the nitty-gritty as to what is killing their group, what are the mechanics that we're missing, things like that. So this is a really, really huge boon to people who do endgame content, who do progression. And that's not just limited to 12-man content, it can also be used for 4-man content as well. So this is a really nice tool to help people improve. And they even said this on the live stream. The whole idea behind using this functionality, adding in this functionality, is to help people improve. And finally, he takes note that the actual reading of the logs is not a base game feature. The logging is a base game feature, but again, you do have to activate it. You have to manually activate it by typing in /encounter-log in the chat window. So it's not even automatically on whenever you're entering in a group. And again, like I mentioned earlier, you have to actively enable it. You have to actively remember to upload to ESO logs. You have to actively search that person out. So it's not a base game feature. It is a third-party feature. So it's basically, there's a lot of hoops you got to jump through in order for a lot of these people's assumptions to kind of come true. So yeah, a lot of the complaints and things that I've seen, the negativity doesn't really hold much water. And I think this post from Code really, really exemplifies and lays out the explanations as to why a lot of these concerns are basically misguided and kind of centered around misinformation. So I just thought I would basically let you guys know that encounter logging is happening and it is coming onto the base game. It's only active on PC because consoles, you guys don't really have this functionality built in. So for those of you guys who are on PC, this is what's happening. It is coming in, so make sure to give feedback to the devs when the PTS goes live on Monday. For right now, all the logs will automatically be set to private, so any logs that are generated on the PTS, only you and whoever I think you shared a link to are able to see the logs. Just please play around with it, and it will really help out both the website creator as well as the devs to kind of see how people are using these logs and things like that. So that is it for this video. Again, there's a link down in the description below to the Discord, the Toxic Rating Environment Discord. The ESOlogs.com creator is on that Discord, so if you want to send her a message, you can just ping them on TRE, or you can find them on the TRE members list and private message them. I'll also send in the description below, also have a link to this specific post here, so that way you guys can also kind of read through the threads and kind of look at the community feedback, and also give feedback if you have a forum account to the devs here. I hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.